The setting sun bled orange across the pale blue walls of the university's design wing, turning the waiting room into a painting of hope soured by nerves. My name was the last called. When it echoed from the receptionist behind her desk, I felt every wrong choice I'd ever made shiver through my body, switching from architecture to fashion, skipping out on my cousin's wedding to finish a dress, the fight with my father that left us silent for almost a year. I rose, smoothing my skirt. The fabric, an airy muslin I'd printed and hand-dyed, seemed suddenly juvenile, an emblem of how out of place I was. Inside the committee room, 5 professors in crisp blazers and bright lipsticks sat behind a table. On the wall, past winners' sketches frowned down from their frames. I set down my portfolio and waited, palms sweat-slick and trembling. "Camilla Soares," began Dr. Ramos, the head of department. Her reputation for brutal honesty was famous across campus. "Your work is ambitious." My heart faltered. Ambitious didn't sound like a compliment. "Your colors are very bold, rather unorthodox for the current trend cycle," added another professor, flicking his pen like a conductor's baton. "Do you imagine there's a market for them?" What could I say? That I'd spent nights watching the sunset stain Leblon Beach, transposing its colors to silk and linen, believing beauty could sell itself. That I'd grown up in a barrio where boldness was necessary armor. I forced composure into my voice. "I think Rio needs to see itself reflected," I said, "not just European frost and monochrome, but—" Dr. Ramos cut me off. "But Rio is not the world, Miss Soares. The fashion calendar is global." The other professors didn't look at me. One wrote bored on her forms. Something deflated inside me. The living core of hope exhaled like a punctured balloon. "We appreciate your passion, but your vision is simply not aligned with the Institute's goals. We wish you luck in your endeavors elsewhere." I bowed my head, gathered my sketches, and left the room. The echo of the door shutting felt final, the sentence of someone condemned. Outside, dusk bled its final light on the campus garden. Joe, a classmate, found me on the bench there, shoulders hunched. "You went too wild, Cammy," he said, not unkindly but with that shrugging dismissal common here. "These people, they want safe things like their own careers." I bit my lip, the burn of tears sharp, but swallowed it. Rio was full of yellow butterflies flitting in traffic, of samba from open windows, but sometimes it was just a city that didn't understand you. I didn't cry, not until the bus ride home as we wound through the hills. At home, my mother was stirring beans over the stove. The perfume of bay leaf, onions, and smoked sausage filled the tiny kitchen. She glanced up at my face and said nothing. I let my portfolio thump to the table. "Mammy, they didn't want me," I said, voice quaking. "They said my work is too much, too colorful, maybe even childish, I think." She wiped her hands on her apron and gave me a hard look, the same one she reserved for neighborhood gossips. "Rio was built by people who believed in things nobody else saw. You ask your father what they said when he opened a bike shop in '82. I didn't bring it up to Pap. He would only sigh, maybe tell me to get a job at Jonah's bake shop for stability. My Aunt Jonah, when I visited 2 days later, was less gentle. Design, you thought you were meant for runways. Menina, you'll come back here and make a real living soon, mark my words." I went to bed each night chased by their laughter, large and unkind. Even my cousins rolled their eyes at family lunches. "Look at little Camilla playing with dolls still." Once my uncle passed me and muttered, "Maybe if you designed something useful, like uniforms for Fluminense." For a while I believed them. I slept late and took shifts at the bookstore downtown, watching tourists buy glossy volumes of Parisian fashion, my portfolio gathering dust in the corner of my room. In the soft coolness of dawn, I'd lay awake and try to believe, but the rejection replayed itself, cruel and clear. Too much, not what the world wanted. 4 months passed like sticky honey, sluggish and clinging. One day, as I was shelving a book, a customer asked me if I could help him find a book on Brazilian textiles. He wore a linen shirt, handmade leather sandals, and carried himself with an easy grace. I found the volume, a thick, overlooked monograph, and he asked distractedly, "Do you like fashion?" That single question opened something I'd sealed up. I told him awkwardly about my designs, my love of color, my belief that Rio deserved a new style. He gave me his card. "Send me your work. I'm scouting for new artists for an international workshop here in Lapa next month. My name's Eduardo. I teach at Parsons sometimes." He left. I half believed it was a prank. Still, I emailed him my sketches that night, explaining I'd been rejected by university, but I had a vision. He replied in half a day, "You're invited, don't let them frighten the beauty from you." The workshop was held in an old colonial mansion, its walls a patchwork of peeling ochre, bougainvillea wrestling across wrought iron gates. The other participants, a flock of glitter-eyed dreamers from Argentina, Senegal, even Sao Paulo, greeted me as an equal. For 1 week, we stitched, painted, argued, and remade our designs on mannequins or ourselves. Eduardo listened to my answers, asked about the stories behind motifs I'd hand-embroidered. Sometimes he'd let silence stretch, waiting for me to realize something new. At the showcase, a fashion journalist snapped photos of my sundress, lemon yellow, turquoise, and rose. "It's like a Rio sunset you can wear," she said, scribbling notes. Eduardo took me aside, eyes shining. "You belong in this world, Camilla, the rest is noise." Still, it was a lonely walk home that night. When I told my family, their skepticism was less open, more resigned. "That's nice," Mammy said, but she did not tell my aunt. Papai only squeezed my shoulder, eyes sad. In this city, everyone knew someone who'd thought themselves special and ended up with nothing. But Eduardo sent my photos to colleagues abroad. 2 replied, one in Barcelona, one in Cape Town, offering internships. The Barcelona atelier wanted me to help design a line inspired by Carnaval. The idea filled me with terror and wonder. I almost didn't go. The morning I left, my father gave me a battered red handkerchief, his lucky charm, and said, "Don't let them take your color, fill her." Barcelona's air was cool and salty, the ocean a different blue. The atelier was a storm of silk, the lead designer a hurricane of expectation. My first days, I ruined 2 bolts of imported wool and cried in the bathroom, sure I'd made the wrong choice. But I forced myself to speak up in meetings, sometimes gently, sometimes with the hard head my mother had blessed me with. The collection borrowed from the joy of my childhood blocks, swirling ribbons, beads, colors like guava and papaya, and when the local paper called it as wild as Rio in party season, my boss grinned. "We're keeping you, Camilla, your touch sells." I stayed 2 years, learning how to sew dreams into seams, how to balance tradition and audacity. The atelier paid for me to complete my degree online. I watched lectures in Spanish and Portuguese while hemming evening gowns. When my visa expired, I returned to Rio, a little older, less raw, with an embroidered satchel filled with proof. Press clips, sketches, and emails from clients who'd bought my clothes. I expected something when I returned, not fanfare, but a lifting of that heavy doubt that neighborhood faces wore. Instead, my family's greeting was muted, cautious, as if waiting for the punchline. Papai hugged me but stayed quiet. Mammy made feijoada and asked about the weather in Spain. When I unpacked my sketches, my cousin, leaning against the wall, just whistled. "Still not a real job though, nay." The skepticism hurt, but less than before. I had muscle now, not just nerves. I rented a narrow studio downtown, a 3rd-floor walk-up above a dentist's office, and began to take private commissions, brides, quinceañeras, carnival queens who wanted a piece of themselves in their costumes. The community's reaction was no victory parade. Some clients came and loved their dresses, others burst out laughing or worse, stiffened as if my audacity was contagious. "Too bright for you, querida," I joked once. She never replied, but she did send her sister the next month. Word grew slowly. I liked walking to the studio at sunrise, scissors and thread heavy in my tote bag, passing under the jacarandas of raw Ducatit, the scent of samba and diesel in the air. Each day I stitched another row of color between my old life and the new. My mother visited sometimes, pretended not to notice the cheap rolling rack or paint splatters on my jeans. My aunt dropped by once, looked around and sniffed, "Well, at least you're busy." But then, in my 3rd year back, Rio announced a new fashion contest, funded by a wealthy socialite who wanted to showcase homegrown talent. The winner would dress as celebrity for the Novo's Talentos Gala. I entered. My entry was a gown the color of passion fruit and sky. On the morning I was named a finalist, my father cried. He hugged me so hard my ribs ached. My mother went to mass and lit a candle, telling every neighbor. Even Aunt Jonah called my studio. "You made the shortlist, Camilla, that's for real estilisters." But the city's doubts lingered. In the press, some said my use of non-traditional fabrics was gaudy. Online, a blogger mocked one dress as a tropical mess. The wound was smaller now, more like an old bruise, but it throbbed with each critique. The night of the gala was a riot of sequins and citrus perfume. Photographers crowded the red carpet. My client, a singer famous for her capoeira and for never wearing dresses, stepped out in my design. Paparazzi screamed. The dress shimmered, fluid as the ocean and bright as a mango split open. At that moment, in the golden glare of flashbulbs, the noise of all the old laughter, all the doubt fell away. It merged with the music in the distance, with the chatter and the applause, with every stone of the city I loved. The next day, the dress was everywhere. The cover of O Globo, viral on Instagram, praised as the soul of Rio, unapologetic, jubilant, impossible to ignore. Word sprinted down the street. When I opened my studio after the gala, there was a real line, of girls and mothers and a few bashful brothers, all waiting to have a bit of Rio sewn into their lives. My mother came early, carrying sweet coffee and pride. My father brought pastel pastries for everyone. Even my cousin, the one who teased me about dolls, brought her friend who wanted a dress for her engagement party. Then, as if fate had planned it, the very committee woman from my university, Dr. Ramos, arrived at my door. She introduced herself with stiff grandeur, but her eyes flicked to the press photos on my wall. "We're curating an exhibit on contemporary Brazilian design," she said. "We'd like to display your dress." I stood still, breath sharp in my chest. The room, with its bolts of bright cloth and stacks of half-finished sketches, seemed suddenly a universe I'd built from rejection and stubbornness. My hands trembled. My family was there, Mammy with her hard stare, Papa with quiet pride, Aunt Jonah looking genuinely surprised. For the first time, all gathered silent. I nodded, voice steady but soft. "Thank you." "I'd be honored." Dr. Ramos lingered at my display case, the yellow dress worn the night before by a star, its hem stained faintly with sequins and the sugar of spilled caipirinhas. For a moment, silence stretched taut as thread. Then she spoke, not unkindly. "You've made something special, Camilla, I hope you know that." I watched her as she left, her heels clicking down the steps. My mother squeezed my hand. "Guess they see it now, fill her." After the visitors left, the studio was golden with late afternoon. I sat alone for a moment, remembering the bench outside the university, the words that had haunted me, too bold, too much. The city outside was alive with music and color, always bigger than its doubters, always brighter than fear. I knew at last that grief over rejection had, in some peculiar alchemy, become clarity. I had returned home not just with success but with a purpose, a vivid thread running through each thing I made, through the city itself. It was my city always, and now perhaps it saw me too.